Horizon TV, the beacon for the nation.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good evening right here from Horizon TV, and this is Live Real Talk. My name is Faisal Qasim. Thank you so much for making time for us. And tonight we will be talking about the budget 2021-2022, a budget that was read by Finance Minister Ukur Yatani yesterday on the floor of Parliament. Many have reacted to it differently. Of course, it has been termed as the most expensive budget, and some leaders coming out, like former member of parliament, former National Assembly Majority Leader Honorable Aden Duale, coming out and saying that this is the worst budget Kenyans ever had. But again, before that, let's listen into what some Kenyans had to say on the streets.
Try venye inaweza kufavor the common mwananchi, you know, at times kuna watu wanaweka tu budget tu and then vitu zingine zinapanda drastically juu kama price ya bread. Kuna watu wenye hata saizi wana bread kwa nyumba, unaona. Kuna mtu mwenye alikam kwa job hata hajakunywa chai, simply juu hawezi afford your bread, yeah? And then kuna ule mtu mwenye ako pale juu hata hajui price ya bread.
Okay, my name is Samuel Obiero. Regarding the budget that was read by our CS Ukur Yatani, I've got the following to maybe express. First, the budget is so huge. 3.66 trillion is historical because we've never really had a budget of that magnitude. But on the other hand, we've seen that a lot of the budget shall be financed by borrowing, meaning we've got a deficit which is huge, almost $1 trillion. So this means taxes must be raised in order to really plug that hole in the budget. So we are going to see an increase in taxation. They are saying of excise tax on some other commodities, and this is really going to hurt the economy a great deal. One thing that I've seen, certain sectors of the maybe government has been allocated some funds, like education has received the largest chunk of this budget, and then we are seeing there's been a reduction in some other areas. What I would like to say is that we need to live within our means as a country. There's no way Kenya revenue can only raise revenue of 1.7 trillion and then we do a budget of 3.6. The kind of deficit or the money that we don't have is so huge. So it means we are going to borrow a lot. We should start living within our means as a country. If at all Kenya Revenue Authority can only raise a revenue of 1.7 and then other non-tax revenue, maybe from appropriation aid and maybe grants and other foreign support, can only account for around 2 trillion, then our budget should be around 2.5 or not more than 3, because we are straining as a country. We have been burdened as a country. We are paying a lot of debts, and our debt ceiling is 9 trillion. We are now going to maybe have to bridge that 9 trillion and increase the budget ceiling to around 11 or 12 so as to borrow more to support this budget. So the fact that we are operating on maybe debts will make this economy stagnate. Due to COVID-19, our economy has suffered a lot. We haven't recovered as a country. We are told around 1.4 million people have lost jobs, especially in the hospitality industry, in the tourism industry, in the travel industry. Many lives have been affected. People have lost livelihoods. So we expected a budget that could support the economy to get back to its maybe normal kind of operations. We wanted to resuscitate the economy and see maybe more emphasis placed in manufacturing and agriculture, in creation of jobs, and to spur economic growth. So according to me, our CS Ukur Yatani has a homework. He must redraw the budget again and make it workable, because we cannot have a bloated budget. The economy is still suffering. We don't have enough revenue to sustain that budget.
Nasir Hassan, Horizon TV.
Nasir Hassan for that good comprehensive report. Mheshimiwa, we're going to start with, and joining me tonight to discuss about this is none other than former Mandera Senator, that is Honorable Bill Okero, who also served as Shadow Finance Minister in the 9th Parliament. Mheshimiwa Bill Okero, thank you so much for making time for us this evening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Just going to start with the general feel and general opinion about the budget. What do you think about 2021-2022 budget that was just tabled on the floor?
I think, Bismillah, I think the gentleman who just spoke, I actually don't think he's he seems to be an expert, but this is the general feeling in this country, that today, with the technology, with these phones and what, everybody seems to be informed. It's a very important thing that the government needs to take into account. This budget is exactly what the young man was saying. It's not just one of the most ambitious, but probably it's really one of the most unusual budgets we've had. A budget where the revenues and the expenditures do not match at all. And so clearly a budget that shows that we are living far beyond our means. In other words, we are putting this country at risk through huge borrowing in order to finance huge expenditure. So in my view, it's really a reckless thing to do, because I think there is no, in essence, governments are there to provide services. And governments are elected by people to serve them in providing those services. In other words, their mandate comes from the people. So in providing services, you do not have a mandate to do what you want. You do what the people want. So we're in a situation where you are, your policies, like the budget, is driven by your own plans. You want to leave a legacy. I want to do this because I think it is the best thing to do, and you're not looking at what the people are saying. You disregard the views of the people who elected you. Then I think it's totally misplaced, and we have that situation in this country.
Mheshimiwa, your former colleague and fellow pastoralist, Honorable Eden Duale, described this budget as one of the worst budget Kenya's ever had. Of course, saying that as a former majority leader, that would make him on the steering wheel of the budget making process. So you were a finance minister as well, and you were a legislator as well. So Honorable Eden Duale says the buck stops with the member of parliament. Would you agree on that?
I think it depends. Why would the former majority leader say it's the worst? I think from the way I understood it, it must be in the context of the huge public debt.
Yes,
I think the
precisely.
borrowing. But you see, it's true, the buck stops with parliament. And unfortunately, Honorable Duale was the majority leader for most of those 8 years of this administration. And it is this, the 8 years of this administration has been characterized by huge borrowing, budgets that don't balance, huge deficits. We call it in finance budget deficit, where the revenues, because budgeting is about allocation of resources. Government does not have money. Money is from the taxpayer. So the government estimates how much money the taxpayers, they can get from taxpayer in a financial year, and then goes ahead to allocate that money. So both the revenues and what you're going to do is all in anticipation. So when you prepare a budget where the revenue estimates clearly show that it will not be able to finance an expenditure, then you are assuming, you are proposing that you want to borrow the difference. So that deficit is something that started largely with this government, this administration. In the past, budgets used to be balancing act. Finance ministers would spend a lot of time trying to find sources of revenue, to try and balance the expenditure and the revenue. It used to be, but I think, in my view, the parliament, the last parliament and the current parliament share a huge responsibility in what has happened. And these things didn't start today. It's a culmination of 8 years of reckless budgeting that has been characterized by huge budget deficits. In all of those years, the budget deficits have been in excess of between 6 to 8 on between 6 to 9%. At no time has it been below that, averaging almost 8%. And this they should not have allowed. And Kenyans have spoken consistently, on this matter for the last 8 years, that look, we cannot have a budget deficit. But let me explain, what does the budget deficit mean in simple, so that for the viewers. What it means is that the government is spending more than it can collect. But why is it spending? It means its activities and programs and projects are huge. They have come up with a wish list, a huge wish list, in terms of projects, not just development projects, but in terms of creating the size of the government itself. The ministries have been expanded, institutions have been created, inefficiencies, wastage, duplication of resources, all manner of things that can contribute to the demand for resources. So you find every ministry, every institution, state corporations, everyone asking for huge amounts of money. And so we have a situation where spending has not been an attention of the government. Instead of rationalizing, when you are an individual, you're earning 100,000 shillings. Well, when you are drawing your end of the month, your paycheck is going to be 100,000. You will plan that at the end of the month, my pay is 100,000. I'm going to put 50,000 on rent. I'm going to spend 20, 30,000 buy food. I'm going to spend so much on fuel, on this, on that. But if you say 100,000, yes, okay, I'm going to rent a house, 100,000. I'm going to stay in drive a car, and spend 50,000 on a car. I'm going to enjoy myself in the nightclubs and those places and spend 100, and you come up with 250,000. Your paycheck is 50,000. The only way you can match that is by borrowing. If you walk to the bank and say, gentlemen, I want to borrow another 150,000 because that's my expenditure.
Finance the lifestyle.
In real, what will happen is that you have to give some security, and the banks have to, they will not just give you money for free. So there's no free money. There's money government is borrowing in order to finance this huge, expenditure. Part of some of it unnecessary, is through a sovereign guarantee. Is the government. It's the government that guarantees, so that any government of this country that will be here for so many decades to come have an obligation to pay. They cannot afford to default. And that money comes from where? It's from the taxpayer. So me and you are going to pay that extra money, that has been spent today. Tomorrow our children or you, all of us will be paying for that recklessness or that wastage or inefficiency, that has resulted. So, and unfortunately, the parliament takes responsibility, because under the new constitution 2010, the responsibility for budgeting lies with the National Assembly. Treasury simply works out proposals and submits them to parliament. In fact, let me tell you, the media creates a lot of hype about budget day, like yesterday, and I said this even yesterday. It's really misplaced, because there's nothing in that briefcase the speaker, the minister was carrying, or the CS was carrying, which has not been in public domain for the last 4 months. Because 3 documents, the budget policy statement was published in February. It sets out all the plans of the government in terms of policy, what they want to do. The finance bill was published 2 or 3 months ago. It has all those proposals to tax, how they're going to raise the revenue. Finance bill sets out the measures the government will introduce in order to generate revenue. Everything is there. The proposed, 16% on VAT on bread is been on that finance bill, which has been in public domain for the last 3 months. The printed estimates of how they are going to spend the money was also published much earlier. So the reason is because these things, when they prepare them, they take them to parliament. Parliament discusses it, has to agree or reject, and it's after they have had their discussions and agreement with parliament that the minister can confidently come before the house and say, okay, I'm now going to read a summary of what is in all those documents. Something and ultimately each of those documents will have been approved by parliament. Finance bill is the only one that, and the estimates are the only ones which they are going to approve in the next few weeks. But they have gone through everything, they have okayed, and that's why the minister can confidently come before the house and say, this is the budget. So they have the powers to say no. In other words, they are involved in the allocation of resources. They are involved in the determination of the revenues that should be collected by a government. They are involved in how much loans, how much borrowing the government should do. There's nothing that Treasury or the government can do without. So when the former majority leader says it's the worst budget, he shares in that responsibility because they have been approving all those budgets, National Assembly in particular, for all those years.
He's been part and parcel of the process. Mheshimiwa, let's bring the point home closer, because with all this borrowing and all this budget, the 3.66 trillion, we're looking at some few tax measures to be introduced, of course, and at the detriment or at the expense of the taxpayers, the Kenyan, the common mwananchi. Before we look into critically the common mwananchi, how is it likely to affect the Muslim institutions? You being one of the members of one of the largest Muslim institutions, talking about Jamia Mosque in the country, you have been part of the system. You have been a legislator and you have been a member of Jamia Mosque. So how will taxation affect the survival of this Muslim organization, mosques, madaris and everything?
You know, the Muslims are part and parcel of this country.
Yes.
Any policy of the government, whether it's taxation or otherwise, will affect the Muslims in the same way it affects all the population of this country.
True.
So the budget generally, you know, on the revenue side, includes measures the government comes up with to raise, tax. And so when taxes are introduced, it will affect all of us. Let me give you a good example. In this budget, the government proposes to tax bread, simple bread that, you know, all of us use in the morning, 16%. 16% VAT means 16% the price of the bread will go up by at least minimum 16%.
Yeah.
The same thing, 15% excise duty on border. Border means you'll spend 16% more. And so many other things, you know, that the government has been taxing. There's nothing that is not being taxed by this government, one way or the other. The water that
you're drinking.
Yeah, in every small bottle of water that you buy, there is a government tax. Now, what does that mean? That would mean one thing, which is very important. It means the cost of goods and services will be much more, will be higher. In other words, things become more expensive in order to finance the government taxes. And so when things become more expensive, it means two things. Those who are in businesses that are generating this revenue, or even the one who is earning an income. If you are on an income of 50,000 shillings, you know, and the government introduces tax on the water that you are drinking, you know, you're paying 5 shillings for every liter of water that you buy. You start paying 16 shillings more, percent more, 16% more on every bread that you buy, and all those things that you know have taxes, petrol and what have you. No. Then the amount of money you are going to spend is going to be so high that what you might save from your salary of 15,000 after you pay for your basic, because what they are taxing is the basic commodities that affect the cost of living. What you are left with will be so small that if you are in the process of, if you are a philanthropist, for example, and you are donating to an institution, yeah. Say you are given some 10,000 out of your 50 every month to an institution, to an orphanage, to a mosque, or to an institution, you might feel constrained that the budget is becoming tighter because of the expenditure is becoming high. The cost of living is becoming very high. Yeah. So then you will reduce what you are giving out. You'll probably find it difficult to give out the 10,000. You'll say, okay, gentlemen, I am only willing to give 5,000 this time. So in that sense, yes, it would affect, you know, Muslims and those people, those institutions who depend on businesses particularly. There are many institutions that depend on business. There are a lot of businesses who give out in charity. And but as Muslims, of course, under any circumstance, whether you are constrained or whether you are required to give out under all circumstances. Hard times, in fact, when you give it out in hard times, it's even more more fulfilling and you get more rewards. Yeah. But clearly, I think from the point which you're saying is that yes, these institutions will be affected because everyone, you know, when the cost of living becomes more expensive, then generally. Then resources become limited in the community, because what the government is doing is they're raiding your pocket. They're not leaving any disposable income in your pocket. And this is something that I like talking about all the time to government, that government taxation policy should not be misplaced. It's not about government raising money all the time in order to build things or build roads. And no, that is not the mandate of the government. It's the people who need to say, yes, we need this service, we need this road, we need this, so that you leave enough resources in the pockets of, because people must also live. They want to spend their money, they want to enjoy their resources, their income. But you cannot say, no, I want to do ABCD, so give me everything you have. I think there is this perception that we are free to tax. And this is why in a representative democracy like ours, we have parliament. And the parliament is there to check the executive precisely for that purpose, to tell them, no, you cannot have a budget of 3.6 trillion in the middle of a pandemic, when businesses have collapsed, people have lost jobs, incomes have disappeared. It doesn't make sense. You tell them, no, you cannot collect, you cannot tax bread. Where do people get money to buy another 16% more on bread? So that's why we have parliament, to oversight that executive and tell them, no, you guys are wrong. But even without parliament, I think it's inappropriate. I mean, given the kind of people we have, half of the population is poor, people have suffered. It would be insensitive, really, and irrational for the government to have come up with any additional taxes like on basic commodities. Interesting
that you mentioned about the checks and balances within the government systems and structures. Last week we had lawyers here, that is Norin Kagia and Abdel Nasser Aden, of course both advocates of the High Court, and one common thing that they both agreed is that they both said is that Parliament is under the duress, is under the executive currently. So the checks and balances is more or less being used as a political weapon, you know, to whip those who might not be singing the tune of the system, for that matter. So in that case, then where should Kenyans rely for hope?
Well, first I want to say that that statement is true. We have said it for, especially since after 2013, particularly after Jubilee came in. One of the unfortunate things about this administration is their disrespect for issues of governance, really, and law and order, unfortunately. And so compromising institutions or undermining institutions, independent institutions, judiciary, parliament, other independent institutions is one of the marks or characteristics of this government.
Sorry to cut you short, Mheshimiwa, but you were part of that government 2014-2017.
I will explain.
Yes,
there's government and there are people who are elected in parliament.
Oh, okay.
So one of the things I think which this government has done in terms of parliament is true. Whoever tells you that it's part of the state capture, you know, executive has literally captured parliament. That statement is a fact, particularly in the last 3-4 years. Because what has happened is through the political party system, they have been really putting the parliament under a lot of pressure. And members of parliament have been told, you either draw the line or you're expelled. You draw the line or you're de-whipped. You know, it's to the point where now members of parliament simply do not exercise their oversight or do not even carry out their representative mandates independently. They look at their interest in terms of what the party wants. And I think that is unfortunate, really. I mean, let me tell you, you know, this party loyalty thing came in mostly in the 20th century. In old days, when parliament, you know, party loyalty was not one of the strictest things. Parliament used to be most active in those countries that had parliament in the 19th centuries and even early 20th century. Because those days, backbenchers used to control parliament because there was independence. But this issue of public, you know, of party loyalty, to some extent erodes that, you know, effectiveness of members of parliament and oversight. And again, I think also interests. We are in a country where people now go to parliament for business. People go to parliament to look for contracts. People go to parliament to look for resources. So, you know, you find members of parliament are looking more at their own survival, their own interest, more than the interest of the society that they represent. And unfortunately, then, I think media has highlighted this so often in the last especially the last few years, you know, where members of parliament, instead of, I'll tell you, when we were in the 9th parliament, things were different completely. I mean, of course, we were under a different constitutional dispensation, but even then, we all belong to political parties. But members of parliament were able to effectively oversight government. We didn't have all this chaos that you see today, in an executive that almost is dysfunctional. I mean, no, there wasn't. I mean, that kind of situation didn't arise. But unfortunately, I think now the time seems to have changed, and people seem to be completely. They have become an appendage. Parliament has become an appendage of the executive, and I think that's the unfortunate thing. But do people have an opportunity? Yes, they have. Forget about the recall and those complicated things in the constitution. But I think the reason why we have an election every 5 years is to afford the public that opportunity to say, okay, fine, Faisal, yes, you didn't do well in our constituency. No, you didn't represent us. When we were being taxed,
basic commodities.
You went and voted for all those things. You voted on the tax on petroleum, you voted on tax on bread, you did this, you did that. Sorry, we're not electing you. Unfortunately, the electorates are also influenced in the election times through ethnicity, through many other factors, bribery and all manner of things. So you find, but that opportunity is given to members of the public. That's why there is a vote every 5 years, so that you can decide, so and so is not helping us, it should be out. But otherwise, I think it's Parliament. Unfortunately, yes, I agree with that sentiment. That is no longer. It's in fact, it's the executive that is oversight in Parliament nowadays.
Interesting. So there is no hope until 2022.
No, why not? No, there are. You see, that institution itself. If members of public today, every member of the public demands from its elected representatives. And they can't, by the way, because these guys are seeking re-election soon. They have a constituency that they go back to.
Yes.
Say, my representative, yes, don't approve that expenditure. Because if you approve, this administration will borrow another 1 trillion. Another 1 trillion that I don't know how it's going to be spent, and I'm not going to pay, and my family will not pay in future. Don't pass that vote. Don't allow VAT 16% on that bread. If you vote, don't come back to this constitution. I mean, the public have that influence.
They've done it 3 years before.
Even today, they can't exercise that.
Mheshimiwa, they've done it 3 years now. The MPs, the member of parliament, the members of the National Assembly, they've done it 3 years. What will stop them from doing it again? And now that you say
nothing. Now that they're
the executives, like the parliament is like an appendage of the executive. So what will stop them from
nothing.
doing it again?
As a matter of fact, you are right. I mean, they're going for elections. They need their political parties.
Yes,
they need the political parties are owned by folks with deep pockets. They need those guys. So I agree, it's an unfortunate situation, but that is it. I mean, you have the opportunity, the public have an opportunity to say no. They are trying actually through the social media and so forth, but I think it's really upon the legislature to come to the aid of this country, because if everything in this country collapses,
yes,
they are part and parcel of this country. They should not allow, because of short-term expediency, a government that is living beyond its means and taxing its people to death. It should not be allowed. It should not really be allowed.
Mheshimiwa, you being a member of Jamia Mosque, and for the viewers back at home, today is an honor to actually interview my boss, battling not to call him Bona Chairman and study and call him Mheshimiwa, address him as Mheshimiwa. You are part and parcel of Jamia Mosque, and of course the member of Thomas Communications, which manages HorizonTV board and the general media function of Jamia Mosque. Mheshimiwa, you've seen and you've broken down the way this budget and taxation is going to affect the Islamic institutions, organizations, setup, masajid and everything. Jamia Mosque, I believe you have a different outfit and a different setup altogether. Basically, the less resources pumped into these institutions will definitely have a ripple effect on dawah. Should we expect now people to go back into the 90s way of going outside and doing lots of borrowing and doing lots of donor seeking in especially the UAE?
You know, give an example of, you've taken an example of Jamia. Jamia's income largely, I think over 90% of its income is from its properties, rental properties.
Yeah.
But you will note that, like last year, when there was a lockdown and businesses were affected, adversely. Many of our properties were vacant, or if they were not vacant, the landlord, the tenants were not able to pay, and our incomes did decline substantially as a result. And this happens to everyone. I mean, in everyone, it's not just on properties, but in every business. Those who are manufacturing, those who are trading, demand has gone down because people have less income, people have no jobs. So that is why last year the government came up with the stimulus package in the middle of that lockdown to try and help different sectors of the economy, tourism, hotel industries. You've seen how, for example, hotel industries have been adversely affected. So if one of our premises here is a restaurant, and the restaurant is shut down for 3-4 months, then you don't expect any rental income from those industries. This has affected everyone across this country. This is why I think many Kenyans have been asking the government, if indeed you want to take some of those measures like lockdowns and so forth, then for heaven's sake, provide some alternatives, provide some support to businesses. And this happened across the world. I mean, many governments have gone out of their way to try and support the businesses so that people don't lose jobs. Because if a business is affected, the first thing that will happen is they're going to fire the employees.
True.
Or they'll reduce the income, the salaries and so forth. So one of the things that the governments have been doing through the stimulus support is to support their business so that people don't lose their jobs and they don't lose their incomes. But we had a situation where in this country, for example, according to the Ministry of Labor, nearly 2 million people lost jobs in 2020 because of the COVID.
Yes.
But you see, regrettably, in this budget, from January, the government went back on those stimulus packages and introduced their taxes, and they went out full throttle to try and collect more, and in this budget they want to even collect more taxes. And they really disregarded the fact. So they will tell you, if you were to ask now the government, they'll tell you, what do you mean? We have something we have provided for economic recovery in this budget. I have 50 billion,
23 billion to be precise.
23
economic
plus
stimulus
then,
program.
23 billion from a budget of 3.6 trillion is less than 0.5%.
True.
But and you ask them, pin them down, they tell you, vijana tunapatia kazi ya mitaa. But you ask the guys who worked the kazi ya mitaa the last few months, we probably struggling to get paid.
Yes.
So we're not serious. I think the best way of assisting people to recover, the best way, businesses, reduce the taxes for them. Because if you reduce my taxes in the business, I'll be able to hire more people because you're increasing my margin. Yeah, if I'm selling this bottle of water 10 shillings,
yes.
But if you remove the tax of 5, I can now make a margin of an extra 5 shillings on that margin, and I can be able to hire somebody else and expand that business. So I think unfortunately the focus of the government is on spending on big projects whose returns or outcomes are not being felt today or tomorrow or in the next few years. For example, I'll give you a good example. Nearly 20-30 billion, an equivalent of that 23 billion, which is what they say will be for stimulus.
Yeah.
An equivalent of that 23 billion, actually 24 billion, will go into SGR.
27.2 billion.
27,
actually.
yeah. That
Nairobi
SGR has already spent hundreds of billions. But if you ask government, how much has this contributed more in terms of revenue? You know very well that every other thing is making so much loss that the government has putting extra 7 billion for operations alone each year. Forget about it breaking even. But that was not the intention. The intention was not even to carry passengers. The intention was to provide freight services across the country so that the cost of doing business would be cheaper, so that the competitiveness. We are in a situation where if you're manufacturing this glass, Tanzania is also going to manufacture, and Uganda will manufacture. The people who are going to buy will see which is the most competitive in terms of the price. So many years ago, you'll remember when we were young people, this was the industrial hub for Eastern Central Africa. Everything from toothpaste,
the popular industrial area,
electronics, to anything, machinery, to Tanzania, to Uganda, everything was being manufactured here. Today, so that actually, that's why they were our largest trading partners. Today, if you go to Namanga border, Kenya is, there are more trucks coming to Kenya with goods, everything from onions and tomatoes to eggs and to everything, than Kenya exporting anything. The same thing happens in Uganda. Uganda was our largest export destination. Today it's, you know, we're importing more from Uganda than Uganda imports. Even energy we import from them. So then we are no longer competitive. Our cost of production is still very high. Energy, I'll give you energy, for example. We are pumping, you know, 40, 50, not less than 50 billion every year into energy to try and make energy less expensive. But I'm telling you, it's one of the main pledges of this administration when they came in 2013. But today the cost of power is still very high. It's more than it was in 2013. It's if you're manufacturing, you'll tell me. Forget about the household, even for manufacturers. In spite of the fact that we are spending billions and geothermal this and that and every kind of, you know, but so we had a situation where the budget of Kenya, it's the largest in East Africa. In fact, consistently for the last, how many years I can remember, it's been, let me tell you, when I was the Shadow Finance Minister, the budget of Kenya was more than the budget of Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, Malawi, and DRC combined. Yesterday's budgets, which were read for East Africa, Kenya budget was more than Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi combined.
Other facts here, I don't know where so my producer can put them on the screen.
Yeah, you see, imagine then with all that expenditure, all that resources we have on expenditure, if you ask an ordinary Kenyan outside Nairobi, his standard of living is no better than that of a Ugandan or a Tanzania or Rwanda. Yet we are spending all that money. So it's about misplaced priorities. This is the way I look at it.
Very, very, very interesting facts. Mheshimiwa, back to the question that I asked you about the activities and the ripple effect of DAO activities in this country, to be precise, because we've seen how philanthropies are going to be affected, and that's going to affect their philanthropic activity and contribution to some of these institutions. So are we likely to see a reverse? Are we likely to see us going back into the 90s way, where we would depend heavily on the Middle Eastern countries to come in and donate and support their activities in the country?
Well, I think, first I think is a fact that things are tight. We are, where I live, we are trying to put up a mosque for the last few months. A couple of years now, as a matter of fact, from last year, and it's been very difficult to get people pay money. It's very unusual. I mean, if construction of a mosque, you would get donors very fast.
Very fast. True.
Immediately, you know, someone takes this material, and this one takes all the windows, and another one does all this, and it was very easy to build mosques and other institutions. But we've realized now 2 years, and we are, you know, not halfway in the construction of that mosque, and we've done everything to try and appeal to businesses. Everyone tells you, sorry, we don't have money. The situation is tight. It's the economy. If the economy is in recession, everyone feels it. And so you find that it's your pocket are constrained, and so people are not able to give. So it's affecting, yes, it's affecting activities, our activities is affecting. But going back, shall we go back to looking for donor assistance from countries like Middle East and so forth? I think it's not easy. A lot of things have changed. You know, after 9/11, it has become very difficult for countries from Middle East to support Muslim institutions or Islamic programs in other countries. It's become extremely difficult. You remember the situation. So if you are a businessman in any of those countries and you wanted to support an institution here, I mean, it's not that easy to do that. First, the governments would probably not allow, and you will have to. It is not going to be easy for you to. So but I think more importantly, the situation of the pandemic is the same everywhere. I mean, economies in fact those countries have been hit more than even in, you know, it's the case in Africa. You know, and so it's global really. In fact, because businesses have been affected everywhere, and so it's not easy to today try and get donors from either in Europe or in Asia or any other country to try and. So it's not going to be easy. The circumstances have changed, but the current pandemic has made it very difficult for businesses to survive, and everyone is bleeding.
Interesting. Abdullah Aden, the discussion, we've been so engrossed into the discussion that my producer is reminding me that we have some comments on YouTube and Facebook and some few SMSs streaming in. I'm just going to take a few minutes to read some of them before we come to you, Mashima, for your parting shot. Abdullah Aden say we should decline pay tax because you don't see any value for the Wanjiko. Abdul Mumtaz says, Assalamu alaikum. Ali Abdul says, best way to reduce tax, business agree with Mr. Biloker. Of course, overwhelming messages coming in, of course, on Facebook as well, and on our SMS platform. Too many messages coming in. Now, Moshimia, because in the interest of time, of course, we cannot delve so much into this. But again, you've mentioned on something which is very critical that I would want us on a very different platform to do a public invite. I'm doing a public invite now to invite you. Come and talk about politics, Islam, and basically your responsibilities, because I've mentioned that now people are going there for survival and for business and not for the interest of the common Mwananchi out there. And of course, over and above the responsibility that you have over your constituents, of course you're going to be asked by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Yeah.
So let me comment on that, because it's it's an important point, really. Of course, we are in a country where we live with other societies and other communities and other faiths.
Yes.
But as a Muslim, you have a responsibility far greater than anyone else to ensure that fairness and justice is done. Number two, to ensure that you account for your amana, your responsibility. When you are elected to hold an office, it is an amana, it's a trust, and you will be held to account on that trust. So when we find situations, what's going on in areas where Muslims are majority, and you find the same kind of situation is happening in those areas as are happening in others, for example, theft of public resources, mismanagement or misplaced priorities, or leaders not standing up for just and equitable, matters at national level. You find that a certain policy of the government contradicts or undermines the interests of your community or the interest of your region, and you are not able to speak about it, or you support it because of other political expediencies. I think all those things really would impact on you as an individual, because at the end of the day, it's not about accountability to the people only. They'll be accountable. Also, we are all accountable, at the end of the day, in Yawm al-Qiyamah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we need to really look at it from that point of view. Because I'm telling you, in this country, if you stand up for truth, if you stand up for and it's for everyone, by the way. As Muslims, it's not only you looking after the interests of Muslims, but in terms of fairness, in terms of justice, in terms of equitability and so forth, you need to stand up for every human being. So I think as Muslims, we need to lead, really, and say, look, it's not fair what the government is doing. It's not fair what the executive is doing in this or in that, and lead the way in terms of that. So I think, yes, I agree with you that there is a we are on a different pedestal on this, but I think we need to, as Muslim leaders in this country, elected particularly who hold office, we need to raise the bar and say, no, look, I have a responsibility. I cannot support this. Risk comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It doesn't come from anybody else. But if you stand up, for truth, and you get the support of Allah, you need to stand up and say, no, we cannot support this. For example, the way this country is going now, in terms of the economy, it's affecting everyone. Businesses are suffering. Common Mwananchi are suffering. Government is taxing. They don't care. They want money to do this or to do that. And you have an opportunity to say, no, your vote counts. One vote, because they go by the votes. Everything in this kind of our government, our system of government, is the votes that count in the House. And your vote will count. Your say will count. So I think we need to stand up and say, no, and there's a lot of unfairness. You've seen even the way resources are allocated is misplaced. Regions that deserve, for example, to be given water because they don't have water. Every day you're seeing people dying for lack of water or lack of food. They don't get enough allocation. But another region, for example, that does not need water, where water is being used for agriculture, water is being used for other things, you get 100 times more money, and you are there and you are simply accepting that situation. I think it's not right. I think it's important that you speak out whenever you find this kind of situation as a leader and say, no, we not accept this, especially in Parliament.
Interesting. Mheshimiwa, you say the majority will have their way as the minority will have their say.
Yep.
Thank you. Your parting shot tonight as we are wrapping up this topic on budget 2021-2022, of course, in respect to Mwananchi and the sense of hope. No, I think the positive thing about this country is people are informed. This is really very, very important, because people seem to know. People know their rights. People know when something is not going right. And you've seen in every opinion poll that comes out, Kenyans saying that we are not going in the right direction. And even on something like this, or all the interviews that have been done in the last 2 days about the budget in all the media houses, Kenyans have spoken out very strongly that the direction this budget is taken is not good. One, this over-borrowing to provide this mega infrastructure that is not giving out returns immediately is misplaced. Let us live within our means, because living within our means means less taxes. Allow people to get jobs and allow them to earn the little income. You earn 25,000, you'll be taxed, and 25,000 is. So I think that itself is positive. But I think my other point is that the government needs to be sensitive. There is a pandemic. People are hurting. They are losing jobs. They are losing their incomes. They are in hospitals. People are dying. I think it's wrong for the government to start spending trillions of shillings on buildings, on activities that can be shelved, for heaven's sake. It's not the time for it, and you can do that by reducing some of the taxes, as they did last year, to try, and it's not the time to we still are in the middle of that crisis. We need government to be sensitive and remove something like this bread tax. You should remove it. There's no reason why you should be taxing bread. Look for what? Get money and then spend on who? The same people you're spending on money are the same people you're taxing. It doesn't make sense. Why do you want to tax a border? Majority of Kenyans today who are youth who are employed, their source of livelihood is on the border. Why do you want to put 15%? It doesn't make sense. They're cooking gas, every little thing, they are looking for money. Everything about government is about how to raise revenue. It's misplaced. It's about your expenditure. Cut down your expenditure. Reduce, live within your means. Why must you be looking for more revenue? You're making things very expensive. Everything in this country has become so expensive. I'm involved in an industry where a unit, some commodities we produce, was costing 2,000 shillings last year. Today it's costing 4,000. 100% increase. Part of it is the taxes, part of it is the raw material, input, everything. Because once you increase something, the other one also increases. So your inputs all go up. So you're making life now more difficult for people, just in order to collect more money and leave some legacy. You don't need to, really. And I mean, there are things which government does not need to. So I hope the government will really appreciate that things are bad and people are hurting, and they don't need to really tax people more than they have already done. Wow. Strong, powerful words right there from former Mandera Senator Honorable Bill Okero. And of course, a respected
former, I don't want to run into trouble.
Former, I said former Mandera Senator. You mean no more politics? No going back into politics?
I don't want to run into trouble, yes.
No more politics?
We
have a county that's being run by two governors. One was impeached and decided he's not going home, and the other one has already been sworn in.
So with all the demand for the governors, then I think some of us will retire.
Interesting conversation here with my boss, Honorable Bill Okero, on budget 2021-2022. Of course, I hope you've benefited back there at home as much as I have benefited right here inside the studio. This has been the live Roll Talk with me, Faisal Kasim. See you next week, same place, same time, as we'll be tackling another topic that you will definitely be interested in. Thank you so much for your time. See you next week. Assalamu alaikum.